Yeah, it seems to us that the dominant cryptocurrencies are those that people anchor on the most. So they're going to key in on what's going on with Bitcoin. They're going to key in on what's going on with Ethereum. Um, those are, they're the loudest in the market. That doesn't mean that others don't matter, but I, as we track cryptocurrency confidence, we see a fairly strong association with those prices.
Welcome to The Ripple Effect, the podcast that takes you on a journey through the minds of Wharton faculty. I'm your host, Dan Loney, and in each episode, we'll be diving deep into the inspiration behind the groundbreaking research that Wharton professors have conducted and exploring how their findings resonate with the world today. So, how do consumers feel about cryptocurrency right now? There is promise seen by many, but cautiousness from others. Pleasure to be joined by Cait Lamberton, who is professor of marketing and co-editor of the Journal of Marketing here at the Wharton School. Cait, great to talk to you again. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good. I think it's interesting because there's so much exuberance around cryptocurrency, but it's still, an interesting process that a lot of people are trying to learn what cryptocurrency is and what it will be able to do. So probably the attitudes of a lot of consumers are kind of all over the map.
Yeah, it's very confusing, and it's interesting because it's called cryptocurrency. So we think it's going to act like a currency. And so if you come at it from a finance perspective, you assume that what that means is there's some stable underlying thing about which people can agree, and there's an underlying asset, and we can at least given good data figure out what it's worth. But the reason we're interested in this from a marketing perspective is because it acts more like marketing things do, in the sense that it's very subjective and it's very malleable and it's very heterogeneous as a result, both within and across people and within a moment and across time. And so when you say people are trying to learn about it, we can understand why it's so hard to learn about. The data changes constantly. And you ask one person or another person, not only are their perceptions different, but the data they're using to form their perceptions are different. So learning it is a tricky task. And you can't blame anyone who sort of throws their hands up in the air and says it's a moving target.
Well, and realistically, it doesn't help it that we've had instances pop up over the last few years of negative actions, FTX being one of them. From a marketing perspective, uh, the old line, and I'm sure you've used it from time to time, any press is good press. This is not the case when you have something like FTX pop up.
It's only good in the sense that it makes people pay attention and perhaps be more careful. We've also seen a lot of high profile cases where people were taking advice from individuals whose understanding of cryptocurrency was perhaps also not founded in the best data available, or who perhaps had faith in cryptocurrency that was rooted in information given by sources that were drawing information from another source that was less or more reliable. But again, so we can say all press is not good press, but I think to the extent that it provides more information to us about how this works, it's useful for us, at least as as either a cautionary tale or an informative option for us. Um, and and to that extent, all these things are negative in the short term. I think they do provide some illumination about the way it can unfold in the market.
So you and your colleagues here at Wharton have come up with the Consumer Cryptocurrency Confidence Index. Tell us a little bit about it and why you think it will be important moving forward.
Yeah, so given that cryptocurrency is such a socially valued phenomenon, we were really interested in how that value was emerging. It seemed to us that in the world of really most blockchain assets, the value is driven by basically what people think of it. And in fact, one of my collaborators on this index, Martin Paul Fritze, and I had also written a paper on the way that people valued NFTs, which are another blockchain associated asset. And what we found there is that the value is completely driven by social currency. It's not about even scarcity, which in classical economic terms should matter. But scarcity, if anything, had a negative effect. So we thought, okay, if this is all about social value, then what matters is just how people feel about it. And so shifting that over to cryptocurrency seemed a natural step. And the nice thing about confidence is that people can tell you how confident they are. That's a completely subjective perception, and it's easy for people to self-report. And so we simply started asking people, how well do you think this is going to go? How likely is it that you're going to be able to use this at more places in the next 6 months? How likely do you think this is going to be widely accepted? How likely do you think it's going to be that it has more as opposed to less value in the future? People can make those predictions, and perhaps those predictions are all that really matters in determining how much they're willing to pay for it in the present.
How much does the fact that there are several cryptocurrencies out there, does that impact the mindset of the consumer yet, or is that still somewhat to be determined? Because again, this is still relatively new.
Yeah, it seems to us that the dominant cryptocurrencies are those that people anchor on the most. So they're going to key in on what's going on with Bitcoin. They're going to key in on what's going on with Ethereum. Um, those are, they're the loudest in the market. That doesn't mean that others don't matter, but I, as we track cryptocurrency confidence, we see a fairly strong association with those prices. Um, some of the others that are more short lived possibly track momentarily with the more dominant cryptocurrencies. But, to be honest, we haven't looked at what happens when there might be a flood of smaller cryptocurrencies that enter the market and leave. It's likely that those are going to be noticed by a smaller segment of the population. We're trying to capture the confidence that's a list that is expressed by general population. So we're capturing samples that are not only people who already own crypto, who are already following crypto, but people perhaps who have a less direct connection to crypto on a daily basis.
So, what are they telling you then about cryptocurrency, their understanding, their potential use? I mean, there's certainly obviously a lot of questions that could be asked right now.
Yeah. So, an interesting thing is that since we started collecting this data in early 2023, it has steadily increased, which you would expect with any new technology, any new product. As it becomes more familiar, even if people don't really know a lot more about it, just by virtue of becoming more familiar, people feel like, oh, it's probably more okay by virtue of sticking around. Um, but there's some really interesting asymmetries in it. So, for example, people are far more willing to pay in cryptocurrency than they are willing to be paid in cryptocurrency, which is kind of a funny thing because it really doesn't make any difference. It's just money going in and out of your bank account, but they're still not quite okay with you paying them. And so that tells you that there's still some wobbliness in there, even if they say they're very confident in it. I think that when we get to the point where consumers say, okay, it's okay for me to receive my wages in cryptocurrency, then we're seeing a really strong level of confidence that this is a legitimate way to exchange value. People still do recognize that it's extremely volatile. They absolutely recognize that. But some of them find that exciting. And I would say that is probably, the core finding. If we were to step back from our data as a whole, we would say there's massive heterogeneity in people's perceptions. Some people see it as an investment. And if that's the case, then we would say, okay, we should think about this as an investment. Perhaps that's how it should be discussed. Some people, however, do see it as a currency. Okay, that's a completely different class of material. So that's a different language and a different category. So depending on how people categorize it, we might need to use a different language for it. So I think one of the things that we're trying to understand is how people categorize this, what drives them to categorize it one way or another, and therefore how they handle it, what kinds of risks they're willing to take, what they're not willing to take, whether they're willing to give it to charities, whether they're willing to accept it, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, I guess it's interesting then, the more, or the frequency we see of companies deciding to accept cryptocurrency for payment, then we have more of an opportunity to see its potential growth as we move forward. I remember a story a couple of years ago. The Oakland A's baseball team was trying out accepting cryptocurrency for tickets for people who wanted to come to the games. It
Yeah.
didn't help them a lot, but still, I guess there is this feeling out process of seeing how you can use it.
Yeah, and we're just starting to study that. We are looking right now at what we're calling crypto creep, which sounds bad, but we don't mean it in that way. So we're just starting to look at the proliferation of cryptocurrency ATMs geographically to try to understand the relationship between, for example, localized levels of crypto confidence. So we can understand, at least to some extent, from tax records, the geographic areas in which cryptocurrency ownership is the highest. And then we can start to look at the areas in which acceptance by businesses and um, access via ATMs is higher. We can look at how those things are unfolding over time. Is it the case that the businesses are leading in the sense that they're saying, we're going to accept this, and then more people in that geographic area decide it makes sense for them to own cryptocurrency? Or is it the case that the private individuals decide to own cryptocurrency and then the businesses follow? We're hoping that over time, if we can watch this, we can see who's leading and who's following, because that's a really interesting demonstration of how a technology diffuses with a specifically socially driven kind of technology.
Is it safe to assume that if you're somebody who is kind of in the crypto world right now, that at least you're aware of and thinking more about the potential of regulatory in this space than, say, more so the public in general who just hears the word cryptocurrency and they're not sure about what is all entailed?
Yeah, I don't know. I think none of us know what will happen with regulation. Again, it takes us back to the question of what exactly this is, whether it's an investment or a currency, or whether it's a blend of both, or whether it's something different entirely. What I can tell you is that we've come to understand that there's a psychological factor that underlies people's acceptance of cryptocurrency that is quite independent of political partisanship. Um, there's a correlation, but we can't make some kind of causal claim. And the psychological construct is distributed trust. So people who tend to believe that the world is safer when centralized institutions are running the system uh, tend to be less comfortable with cryptocurrency,
Right.
because cryptocurrency is based on the idea that trust should be democratized, right? And so you would expect that people who believe in centralized institutions are going to be more pro regulation, and they're going to say, okay, maybe this stuff can be out in the market, but we need a centralized institution to make sure that it's managed in a way that's safe. Those people might also choose not to own cryptocurrency because they're not particularly comfortable with this level of democratized trust that exists in cryptocurrency to begin with. The
Right.
cryptocurrency owners like this idea that the world is safer when everybody has a little bit of control, as exists on the blockchain. For those people, regulation doesn't make the world feel any safer. And so they're going to have a very different attitude toward that kind of process. So I think we're going to see different psychological processes unfold that will affect both the way people interact with cryptocurrency and the way that they think about regulation.
Where do you think the research takes you guys next in terms of trying to better understand what's going on?
Well, I think the causality be- behind uh, the confidence itself and the prices of the cryptocurrency is something that we're still trying to understand. There are so many factors that affect people's confidence in something like cryptocurrency. Um, and there's so many chicken and egg problems. We'd like to be able to say we understand what raises confidence in this. We'd like to be able to say that it's confidence purely that is changing the price. It's likely that in some cases, people's innate confidence pushes the price. It's possible, however, that the price changes and then people's confidence changes. So we want to keep trying to understand that. We have some ideas at present and we have some preliminary analysis, but it's a very hard thing to untangle. And as we see more, external shocks, it becomes even noisier. So we want to keep trying to understand that. And beyond that, I think we're going to continue to understand how cryptocurrency changes in its use in the marketplace. It's going to keep evolving. I think when cryptos first came into the market, there were people who said this is a blip. This thing is going to come and go. At this point, I think that's a very tough case to make. Whether people like it or they hate it, it's shown that it has some staying power. And that is probably because it's learning how to evolve. It's learning how to find places where it can become truly useful to people. So it'll be really interesting to see how it continues to find uh, pockets of indispensability so that it becomes a stable part of our market.
Cait, great to talk to you again. Thanks very much for your time and your insight.
Nice talking with you too.
You got it. Cait Lamberton, marketing professor and co-editor of the Journal of Marketing here at the Wharton School. Thank you for listening to The Ripple Effect. We hope you found this episode informative and engaging. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review so that we can continue to bring you the best insight from the Wharton School.